Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip into something deeply dull and historically accurate: your role as a mid-level bureaucrat in the Byzantine Empire. The air smells faintly of lamp oil and damp wool, and your bones are sore from sleeping on a straw mattress stuffed with disappointment. Outside, Constantinople is barely stirring, but you're already awake because your job doesn't care about sleep schedules or circadian rhythms. It only cares about documents, ink, and properly formatted salutations. You stretch joints, popping like someone crushing walnuts in a sock, and drag yourself upright. Your small room is shared with the bitter cold and one persistent mouse you've named Nicephorus. He judges you. There's no fire because you forgot to buy more charcoal, and your one tunic smells like yesterday's pickled onions. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your day predictably by trying not to trip over your own feet as you hobble to the water basin. Byzantine mornings are less sunrise yoga and more accidental toe stubbing and existential dread. The floor is gritty with last night's dust blown in from the street, and your nose is still adjusting to the fragrant aroma of stale incense and mildew-soaked plaster. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows a little late, honestly, and that's your cue to start pretending to be functional. You splash your face with cold water that makes your teeth tingle and contemplate just briefly faking the plague. But you remember that your supervisor doesn't believe in illness or mercy. You shuffle toward the wooden chest at the foot of your cot, where you keep your limited supply of dignity and even more limited wardrobe. Today it's the brown robe with the wine stain near the hem. You sniff it just passable. You mutter a half-hearted prayer, not so much for spiritual merit, but in the hopes that divine intervention will cancel the workday. The Byzantine Empire, in all its bureaucratic glory, is a machine of paperwork and protocols. You're one cog in that enormous over-oiled wheel, a notary in one of the secretor or administrative offices where you spend your days translating imperial will into paperwork no one wants to read. Your job making other people's orders sound fancier. And longer. Much longer. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine love of verbosity was a matter of tradition or a clever way to confuse enemies and employees. Either way, your mornings are haunted by phrases like, "To the esteemed and pious governor of the esteemed and pious province of Cappadocia, greetings, and may your vineyards remain unpillaged." You have 19 of those to write before lunch. You fumble with your belt, which is more decorative than functional, and debate skipping the formal boots for sandals. It's cold, yes, but your boots take 5 minutes to lace up, and you're already late. You compromise by lacing only one properly. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor yells at their goat. You do not inquire. By the time you're fully dressed, you're also mildly dizzy from standing up too quickly. You grab your stylus tucked behind your ear like a sad scholar warrior, and your wax tablet half melted from being too close to your lamp the night before. This morning's fun fact. In many households, people kept a pet monkey chained in the courtyard for entertainment. Yours escaped 3 weeks ago, possibly to find a more exciting life. You don't bother lighting a lamp. The pre-dawn sky is slowly blooming over the skyline of Constantinople, painting the dome of Hagia Sophia in pink and blue brush strokes. The city is beautiful if you squint past the grime. Domes rise like sleepy giants, smoke curls from chimneys, and the distant clang of a monastery bell reminds you that piety is unfortunately not optional. You slip outside and descend the rickety stairs that always creak on the 4th step. A fruit seller's already setting up her cart, swearing in what sounds like 3 different dialects. The street smells of garlic, horse sweat, and optimism that's about to be crushed by the administrative day ahead. As you step over a puddle that is definitely not just rainwater, you mentally rehearse today's tasks. A royal edict needs redrafting, a trade dispute requires notarized summaries, and worst of all, your boss hinted yesterday that someone might be dropping by from the palace. Never a good thing. You pull your robe tighter, resign yourself to the chill, and begin the slow march toward your duty-bound fate. Your shoes squish in a way they definitely shouldn't, and you make a note to find out if one of the city's 88 bathhouses sells second-hand footwear. You pass a group of students from the Imperial School practicing rhetorical exercises. One of them yells, "What is truth?" and the other replies, "Whatever gets you promoted." You nod approvingly. Despite the bleakness, there's a strange rhythm to it all, a comfort in the routine absurdity. Sure, your life is a grind of ink hierarchy and sandal blisters, but at least you're not a barbarian. Probably, depending on who's defining it. And as you duck under a low-hanging laundry line, someone's underpants giving you a gentle forehead slap, you brace for another day of imperial service. By the time you reach the communal bathhouse, the skies slipped from indigo to a dull morning grey. The bathhouse is half a block from your apartment, but in your heavy woolen robe and uneven boots, it feels like a minor pilgrimage. You pass a sleepy fishmonger swatting flies and muttering about that cursed dolphin again. Historians still argue whether trained dolphins actually helped fishers in the Bosphorus, or if that's just coastal myth, but either way you make a mental note to look unimpressed next time someone brings it up at lunch. You push open the bathhouse door with your shoulder, and warm, damp air spills out like a wet dog sighing. It's steamy inside, but not in any glamorous Roman way. This is a functional kind of steam fog clinging to cracked mosaic tiles, and the scent of human effort steeped in olive oil. The sounds of sloshing water and someone arguing in Cappadocian Greek fill the space. You're already late, so you skip the lounging and head straight for your favorite basin, the one that doesn't spit back rust. You peel off your robe as discreetly as one can when standing half-naked among fellow bureaucrats. Your knees pop in protest, your left shoulder has that weird click again, and your tunic leaves behind a subtle onion sweat perfume as it hits the bench. You lower yourself into the shallow tub of lukewarm water and reach for the bar of soap, or at least the thing that claims to be soap. It's grey. It smells like boiled herbs and defeat. You scrub anyway, not for cleanliness but for protocol. The palace expects its scribes to appear neatly maintained, which apparently means no visible mildew or vermin. That bar is low, and you barely clear it most days. You reach for the small flask of olive oil by the basin, pouring a few drops into your hands. Byzantine hygiene has a complicated relationship with cleanliness. Soap is rare. Perfumes are common, and scraping oil off your skin with a dull blade is considered a good exfoliation method. You scrape. It doesn't feel great. From across the room, another notary, a man you've only ever known as the one who whistles, waves awkwardly. He's in charge of grain import manifests and once accidentally double-taxed an entire island. He's also the only person you know who bathes with his sandals on. You try not to make eye contact. You sigh, rinse off, and climb out into the main chamber where a brazier offers some merciful heat. You wrap a rough linen cloth around your waist and sit on the ledge to dry. The bathhouse keeper, a stout woman named Melania, with the voice of a crow and the authority of a general, slaps a brush into your hand and tells you to stop dripping like an amateur. She has a point. As you brush out your hair wet, reluctant, and starting to thin in that tragic ring of mid-career doom, you listen to a nearby group of junior scribes debate beard styles. Long and curling, austere and tightly clipped, a full monk fringe with bonus moral superiority. The Empire loves a well-groomed man, or at least a man whose grooming choices don't reflect badly on his superior. The Imperial Court actually issued grooming guidelines once, possibly more than once. Historians still debate whether Emperor Constantine VII's beard edict was real, or just satire recorded in the wrong ledger. Either way, facial hair can apparently make or break your bureaucratic future. You give your own stubble a once-over in a bronze mirror. It's patchy, like your hope. A pigeon flutters in through a broken window, circles once, and exits as though it forgot why it came. You envy its freedom. After redonning your robe still damp from your earlier trek, you settle on the bench by the brazier to dry a bit more. An older man next to you is mumbling through the Psalms. Not loudly, just persistently. Like he's praying to be promoted to a job that doesn't involve so much sitting. You idly glance at the bathhouse walls. They're tiled in faded blue and gold, chipped in places, but still beautiful in a way that doesn't quite match the smell of mildew. You think about the aqueducts, those mighty Roman leftovers that still feed the city's fountains and baths, assuming no one stole the lead piping again. Last week, someone did. Twice. You finish toweling off and feel just dry enough to risk the outside chill. Your joints ache, your feet are already threatening a blister, and your breath still smells faintly of last night's lentil stew. But you are technically clean, bureaucratically compliant even. You duck out of the bathhouse into the now fully awake city. Merchants shout, children run. A goat tugs its owner toward a heap of cabbages with the raw determination of an auditor discovering budget discrepancies. The sky is overcast, the ground muddy, and your sandal is still squeaking from earlier. But somehow you're ready, if not emotionally, then at least legally, to face the great palace again. You take a moment to stretch your back, which responds with a series of clicks that suggest something ancient and unrecoverable. You begin the walk to your apartment, where your writing kit waits along with the rest of your layered outfit and whatever passes for breakfast in your tax bracket. As you walk, a dog barks at you from a rooftop. You bark back. It looks startled. Victory. Back at your apartment, your breath fogs in the morning air as you wrestle with the front door, which sticks when it's damp, which is always. You shoulder it open, startling the mouse Nicephorus, of course, who seems personally offended by your return. He retreats into his usual corner, muttering rodent curses, you assume. Your living quarters resemble a storeroom with aspirations. One narrow cot, one splintery stool, and one wooden chest, your entire worldly inventory. And now comes one of the most delicate tasks of the day, dressing like someone who has influence without actually having influence. Welcome to Byzantine office fashion, where layers mean legitimacy. Your undertunic is still damp around the collar, so you go for the slightly more fragrant one from earlier in the week. The outer robe, dyed the most respectable shade of not quite brown, still holds its shape, thanks to starch made from leftover barley gruel. You slide it over your shoulders, trying not to wince, as the wool scratches like a cat with a grudge. Now for the fun part, the sash. An ordinary belt would be too simple. You wrap, knot, and re-wrap the cloth several times, trying to achieve that loose yet deliberate effect seen on higher officials. The goal is to look like someone who could sign edicts at any moment, while also knowing you're more likely to be tasked with updating flower records. The sash, a supposedly humble accessory, is actually a minefield. Different knot styles denote your office rank. One loop too low, and you're a secretary's assistant's assistant. One fold too high, and you're impersonating a logothete, which is technically treason. Historians still argue whether the sash code was officially regulated or just one big inside joke among palace tailors. You settle for a mid-tier fold and hope no one calls you out. Next come the boots, leather stiff and decorated with precisely too many tassels. These are supposed to signal your connection to the fiscal department. They mostly signal that you walk funny. You wedge your feet in anyway, cursing softly in Latin and bumping your head on the lintel as you try to stand. Time for accessories. You grab your stylus, a gift from your brother who went into military service because he enjoys predictable danger, and your wax tablet recently scraped clean of a poorly drawn caricature of your supervisor. You also tuck a scrap of parchment with today's appointments into your sleeve. And then you hesitate. Your hat, Not just any hat. The Skiadion, a soft round cap, the Byzantine version of a bureaucratic tiara. Supposed to shield you from the sun, it mostly shields you from looking like you have a single exciting hobby. You put it on. It's too snug. You take it off, rotate it, and put it back on crooked. Better. Outfit complete, you strike a pose in the bronze mirror, channeling quiet despair with just a hint of administrative confidence. You look like someone who files complaints in triplicate. With a deep sigh, you gather your things and open the door again. The morning air slaps you like an unpaid intern. The city's more awake now, donkey carts, rumbling voices rising, and the smell of flatbread drifting temptingly from a baker's stall 2 floors down. You make your way down the stairs, adjusting your sash again because it's already sliding. An old woman on the 2nd floor gives you a look that says, "You'll never make protosecretus," and you offer her your best bow while walking, which is basically a glorified nod with good intentions. The street is still muddy from last night's rain, so you lift your robe slightly with one hand, exposing exactly as much calf as is legally decent. You step around puddles and over sleeping dogs with the grace of someone who has tripped on a fish basket before and refuses to do it again. Another passerby, a courier judging by the blur of his movement, zips by shouting about a lost imperial signet. You nod sympathetically. We've all been there, especially that one guy who lost the Emperor's seal and ended up volunteering at a monastery in the Sinai. Permanently. As you walk, you can't help but notice the quiet status games happening around you. That merchant has a sash embroidered in green and gold, either he's wildly successful or wildly lying. That scholar has a scroll case made from polished bone. That nun has shoes cleaner than yours, which is frankly offensive. You straighten your hat, you tug your robe, you square your shoulders and do your best to look like someone who knows the full imperial genealogy back to Constantine. You don't. No one does. The chart forks like an overwatered fig tree. You pass a beggar holding out a bowl and offering blessings in exchange for coins. You give him a nod and a fig from your sleeve, not for charity exactly, but because last time he hexed your sandals and they squeaked for a week. He takes the fig and whispers something about favorable bureaucratic tides. You choose not to ask. Turning a corner, you bump literally into a junior official with a nosebleed and an open scroll. He apologizes, bows, and mutters something about ink poisoning. You've been there too. 3 times. Ink made with gall nuts can turn on you like a jilted lover. You're nearly at the palace gates when you pass the same shop you always pass, Byzantine chic, a tailor's stall, with mannequins dressed in robes you can't afford and would probably stain anyway. One of them has a miniature diadem on its head. You whisper, "Someday," and keep walking. The great palace looms ahead, golden walls rising like smug authority incarnate. You check your sash one more time. Your hat is still slightly crooked, but you tell yourself it looks intentional. You draw a breath, roll your shoulders, and prepare to greet the gatekeepers who control access to your particular corner of imperial drudgery. You've survived the dressing ritual. You are officially and at least visibly a functioning piece of the Byzantine machine. The palace gates creak open with a satisfying groan, part metal fatigue, part symbolic foreshadowing, and the guards barely glance at you. That's a compliment. If they stop you, it means either you've been demoted or someone matching your description has insulted a eunuch. Neither bodes well before second breakfast. You slip through the archway and into the maze of the great palace. It's less like one majestic building and more like several dozen arguing structures cobbled together over centuries, each with a different opinion on symmetry. Mosaic floors give way to worn brick halls. Grand colonnades, shadow doorways, too small for your ego, let alone your hat. The air smells like ink incense, and that one sack of pickled radishes no one claims. You know these halls so well, in fact, that you can navigate them half asleep, which is useful because you often are. You sidestep a trio of whispering scribes from the Treasury Department, all wearing matching boots, and the kind of expressions that suggest a recent scandal involving missing wine rations. You try not to look interested. You fail slightly. Your office is located 2 courtyards in behind the mosaic of a lion that looks suspiciously like a poodle. You pass under a series of arches into the shadow of the dome that marks the main scribal wing. It leaks during rain, but it's still technically classified as luxurious. You arrive at the door labeled Notaries, Logothetes Minor Section C. You push it open and step inside. The smell hits you first. Beeswax, damp wool, and the lingering ghost of someone's breakfast, probably mullet and garlic paste. A charming combination. Your desk, one of 6 cramped into a room intended for 4, is still where you left it under the cracked fresco of St. Mark, looking unimpressed. You drop into your seat and exhale. The stool rocks just a little, like it's judging you for coming back. You unpack your stylus and wax tablet and reach for the ink pot. It's dry again. You sigh so deeply it almost counts as cardio. Your deskmate, a young assistant named Theodotos, who claims to be descended from a minor Armenian king, leans over and offers you his ink. Only because I haven't used it to forge anything yet. He whispers, smirking. You thank him with a nod and pretend not to notice that he's drawn tiny helmets on all his letters. You begin copying the tax exemption scroll you were assigned yesterday. Word by word, curl by curl, like a scribe sculpting molasses. The imperial script is elegant, complex, and designed to make sure only trained bureaucrats can read it. It's a system of professional job security disguised as calligraphy. Somewhere outside the room, a distant gong echoes, probably a summons, or a very determined janitor. You ignore it. Your task list for today includes 2 petitions from a goat breeder, 3 land grant renewals, and 1 mysterious sealed order marked urgent, which history has taught you is almost always code for long and unsatisfying. As your stylus carves another name into wax, your mind wanders. You recall how your office got upgraded from near the latrine to near the atrium after that unfortunate incident with the chamber pot and the judge from Cappadocia. No one was ever formally blamed, but the rumor involved a cat, a ladder, and some very bad aim. You scratch your nose with the back of your hand, smudging ink across your cheek. You've done worse. Last week you inked your ear by accident, and no one told you until Vespers. Your supervisor enters the room, Flavius First Clerk of the Rolls. A man so tightly wound he makes scrolls look relaxed. His beard is exactly symmetrical. His voice has the sharpness of freshly sharpened reed pens. He looks around, squints at you, then proceeds to ignore you with purpose. Remember, he says to no one in particular, the census deadline is in 3 days. No mistakes. Last time someone confused hearths with heifers, and we taxed a village based on cows. He glares at the room. Do not make me issue another correction. Corrections go in red ink. I hate red ink. You nod along with everyone else. Red ink means someone got angry. Black ink means someone did their job. Invisible ink would be ideal, but no one's cracked that formula yet. A scroll arrives via a pale, frantic boy who deposits it on your desk like it's warm and possibly cursed. It bears a wax seal imperial blue eagle, embossed definitely someone above your pay grade. You crack it open and skim the contents. It's a directive from the Office of Sacred Donations. They're requesting a revised list of monastery exemptions for the Western provinces. By sunset. You groan internally. You just did this list 2 weeks ago. But now they want footnotes, in Latin, and possibly iconographic annotations. You reach for your larger tablet and begin pulling out your reference parchments from the stack beside your chair, which tips ominously under the weight. Theodotos offers you a handful of raisins. Sustenance for the doomed, he whispers. You accept. As you start scribbling again, the background hum of bureaucratic life resumes. The scratching of pens, the occasional cough, someone muttering in Syriac. Somewhere down the corridor, a loud thud followed by laughter, probably the tax clerks jousting with broom handles again. You ignore it. You've got footnotes to invent. Your neck begins to ache from the hunched position. You crack your spine like a knuckle and stretch until your shoulder pops. Across the room, a tiny sparrow has somehow found its way in through the window slit. It perches on the edge of a shelf and watches you. You stare back. You feel a moment of connection. You're both trapped indoors by obligations you don't understand. Then it poops on a ledger and flies out. That you think sums it up. By the time mid-morning bells ring, you've only finished half the monastery list. You're covered in ink. Your back hurts. Your stylus has splintered slightly at the tip, which means it now squeaks on the wax. But you're still here, still transcribing, still making the Empire run one scratched syllable at a time. You blink and realize your hands have gone numb, possibly from writing, possibly from sheer despair. You stretch your fingers and stare blankly at the last line you etched. You meant to write exempt under imperial decree, but your stylus slipped mid-imperial, so it now reads more like exempt under imperial dessert, which frankly you wish existed. It's now officially mid-morning. Your stomach mutters a rebellious sonnet. Time to begin the most sacred rite of the Byzantine bureaucratic day, the unofficial, unrecorded, and unreasonably competitive ritual of securing a snack before the lunch queues form. You nudge Theodotos, and both of you perform the synchronized casual exit maneuver, rising slowly, stretching exaggeratedly, mumbling something about parchment inventory, and slip out the door before Flavius can assign a new task. The hallways are marginally warmer now, filled with a gentle buzz of activity. Scrolls are being transported. Clerks are debating Latin syntax like it's a blood sport. A eunuch strides by, holding a tray of sealed amphorae, and gives you a look that says, "Yes, I control all royal donations, and yes, I still judge your handwriting." You make your way to the palace courtyard, sunlit, tiled, filled with pigeons who seem entirely too self-assured. A handful of vendors have set up near the colonnade. You know each of them by scent: the flatbread guy with the burnt corners, the honeyed fig lady who hums old hymns, and of course the man who sells fish wrapped in more fish, which smells exactly like you'd expect. You opt for the fig lady today. Her fingers are stained golden from syrup, and she hands you a little woven packet of fig walnut and something green you never identify. Try not to spill it on the tax register this time. She mutters, then hums a tune about Saint Basil and death by goat. You perch on the low marble wall near a fountain and begin your snack. The figs are warm. The walnuts crunch in that satisfying way that reminds you of being alive. A breeze passes through the courtyard, tugging at your robe and at the corner of a notice board nearby. You glance over. The latest proclamation flutters in official ink, an announcement about a new coin series honoring the Emperor's latest military victory. Except, historians still argue whether that victory was more of a minor skirmish that ended with both sides declaring themselves winners. But the coins are shiny, and that's what really matters. Next to the proclamation, someone has pinned a rude caricature of a very familiar face. Flavius, scowling from beneath his mathematically perfect beard, holding a scroll labeled "Census Error." You choke on a fig. Beside you, a courier slouches onto the wall, panting. He fans himself with a wax tablet. "Someone sent me to the wrong logothete again." He groans. "I spent 30 minutes explaining tax codes to the guy who regulates bathhouse temperatures." You offer him a bite of fig-wrapped mystery. He accepts with the enthusiasm of a drowning man offered a very dry sponge. "Thanks," he says. "You work in notaries, right? Do you actually get paid?" You laugh. "In theory." He nods solemnly. "I'm still waiting on 3 months of pay. I'm thinking of joining a monastery. At least they feed you." You both sit in silence for a moment, staring at the sky. A passing pigeon drops a feather directly onto your scroll bag. A sign, perhaps. You flick it off and wipe your fingers clean with a bit of old parchment. Eventually, the bells toll again, this time more insistently. You sigh, tuck the rest of your fig treat into your sleeve for later, which is both clever and very sticky, and rise. Back through the archways, back through the side halls, back into your shared office where Flavius now looms over your desk like an ominous church fresco. "Ah," he says, "you're back. Wonderful. I was just assigning the decree revisions." You glance at Theodotos, who is suddenly very absorbed in pretending to mend his stylus. You accept the scrolls inwardly composing your resignation letter in verse. The revisions are in response to a new edict. Some monastery in Thrace has been granted extra land, which means 3 others must now be reviewed, cross-checked and charted on the master ledger. You pull out the massive tax registry volume, a beast of a thing bound in goat hide and passive aggression. The script is faded, the entries disorganized, and some previous clerk clearly doodled boats in the margins. Respect. As you transcribe, your quill begins to catch on a tear in the parchment. You try to smooth it out only to find someone's old wax seal stuck underneath. Curious, you lift the edge gently and reveal a forgotten addendum probably hidden years ago. It outlines a minor tax on candle makers that was rescinded, then reinstated, then apparently just ignored. You stare at it. A bureaucratic relic. Historians still debate whether this tax existed formally or whether it was a clerical experiment gone rogue. You decide to make a note and slide it under your wax tablet for later. It's the kind of thing that might impress the archivist or get you reassigned to candle audits. By late midday, the office has entered that quiet lull known as second scroll syndrome. Everyone is still working technically, but their minds are elsewhere, on lunch, on naps, on existential dread. You stretch, look out the window slit, and catch a glimpse of the sea in the distance, shimmering like a mirage. For a moment you imagine life outside these walls, on a boat maybe, or in a vineyard, or even in a provincial post where your biggest concern is whether the bishop likes olives. But then you remember in the provinces, they make you attend both morning and evening liturgies. And no fig lady. You return to your ledger. Theodotos hands you a new ink pot without looking. The office is silent save for the gentle scratch of quills and one very determined fly attempting to escape through a closed window. You think briefly of the sparrow from earlier. Free, defiant, unapologetically pooping on documents. Someday you'll be that sparrow. Lunch. Not the meal itself, you're not quite there yet, but the time. That languid, sacred hour when the palace seems to exhale, when even the most fanatical archivist lays down their stylus and contemplates chewing something that isn't hardened parchment glue. You set your wax tablet aside and glance over at Theodotos, who has slumped so far into his robe, he resembles a decorative bolster. "Ready," you whisper. He nods without lifting his head. The two of you rise like shadows, trying not to attract attention, and join the stream of fellow bureaucrats trickling towards the outer court. The palace has many eating zones. The fancy ones, those with tiled courtyards, musicians, and actual cutlery, are reserved for the higher-ups, the patricians, and that one guy from the mint office who married a niece of the Empress. You do not go there. You loyal scribe of dusty decrees make your way toward the mid-tier eating atrium, still within the palace walls, but with cracked benches, bread that tastes faintly of ink, and the occasional pigeon that swoops low like a tax auditor. You queue for your portion. Bread, a bit of salted fish, lentil stew served in a shallow clay bowl. The woman ladling it gives you a look that says, "I remember when your beard was less patchy," which is impressive because she says it entirely with her eyebrows. You and Theodotos find a place on the edge of the fountain already half occupied by a philosophical clerk who insists on monologuing about Neoplatonism through mouthfuls of chickpeas. Truth, he intones, is a form of hunger. All form is illusion. Except anchovies. Those are too real. You nod politely and dunk your bread. Theodotos leans in. "Did you hear the rumor about the questor's assistant?" You raise an eyebrow. Apparently he filed a land deed in the wrong province, and the entire Aegean tax register had to be redone. He's now reviewing funeral permits. In Cappadocia. You wince. No one wants to be reassigned to funeral permits. Too many names. too few living people to correct you? As you chew your fish dry salted and somehow still slippery, you overhear snippets from other benches. Debates about military funding, complaints about parchment quality. One very loud voice exclaiming, "I don't care if he's a eunuch, he still owes me a chicken." It's strangely comforting, this chorus of state-employed grumbling. You're not alone in the tedium. You're all trudging through the same molasses of imperial red tape, shoulder to shoulder, lunch to lunch. You scrape the last of the lentils from your bowl and glance around. Behind the fig trees at the far end of the court, the domes of Hagia Sophia glint faintly in the sun, visible over the palace walls. You can't hear its bells from here, but somehow you feel their presence, a reminder of divine order even amid the chaos of overcooked beans. Then, of course, someone screams. Not a panic scream, more of a shriek of bureaucratic dismay. You recognize it immediately. That's the sound of someone realizing they filed the wrong version of an edict, which in this case probably means imperial embarrassment. You and Theodotos exchange looks. Do you go back? Technically, yes. But this is the 1 hour of the day not shackled to the rhythm of wax and decree. So instead you wander. Through the side court past the citrus trees in half bloom, you and Theodotos find yourselves in a quiet corner, rarely visited by anyone who isn't lost. It's the old archive annex, once majestic, now mostly overrun by vines and the occasional lazy cat. You duck inside. The air is cool and dusty, thick with the scent of papyrus and forgotten ambition. Shelves lean like tired soldiers. Scrolls lie bundled in nests of twine and twill. Theodotos pokes a pile. Do you think anyone's touched these since Justinian? You don't answer, because you're not entirely sure this part of the palace was even mapped in your official orientation. A few years ago, someone tried to catalogue it. They made it to shelf 3 before their eyes went permanently crossed, and they took up gardening. Still, there's something comforting here. Time slows. Outside, the empire spins its intricate glittering web of protocol ceremony and politicking. In here, it's just ink and parchment and the quiet hum of records outlasting the men who made them. You pluck a scroll at random. It's brittle sealed with a faded wax blob that might once have borne the mark of an obscure provincial prefect. You unroll it gently. A poem. Handwritten in florid ink adorned with tiny margin drawings of birds, boats, and unmistakably a rather buxom saint. The handwriting is excellent. The content is wildly unbureaucratic. It's an ode to a lover hidden between records of sheep taxes and river tolls. You glance at Theodotos, who's now sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a charter that seems to reference wine measurements in terms of 1 chariot's worth. Do you think he asks someone's going to find our tax lists 1,000 years from now and mistake them for poetry? You pause. Only if they've never read poetry. But it's a good question. History, after all, isn't just emperors and battles. It's this. 2 underpaid scribes in a dusty annex laughing quietly over the bureaucratic equivalent of an accidental love letter. The bells ring again, soft, distant, inevitable. You roll the poem back up and slide it gently onto a safer shelf. Back through the hallways, you go slightly fuller in both stomach and soul. You return to your desk, where Flavius waits with a scroll in hand and a frown so sharp it could cut linen. You're late, he says, though, by maybe 3 minutes. Got lost, you reply. Not entirely a lie. He thrusts the scroll at you. Imperial cross-checking request. They want confirmation on your monastery list. Apparently someone questioned the existence of a certain St. Euphemia's abbey. You groan. St. Euphemia's is real. It's just very small, and mostly chickens. Then prove it. You sigh and sit down. The afternoon awaits, filled with more parchment, more ink, and the endless, wonderful absurdity of Byzantine paperwork. You shuffle through your document pile like a monk, searching for inner peace, but instead uncovering only more paperwork. Flavius has tasked you with verifying the legitimacy of St. Euphemia's Abbey, a sleepy little monastic community, nestled somewhere in the hills outside Thessalonica, or possibly invented by a bored clerk in the 7th century. It's hard to say. You pull the monastery index, an oversized ledger bound in flaking leather and frustration. It smells like damp incense and mistakes. You find the listing for St. Euphemia's on folio 342, squeezed in the margin beside a note about surplus sheepskins. The entry reads, Monastery approx. 4 buildings, possibly 12 nuns. 1 aggressive goose noted. Charming. But that's not enough. You must confirm its legal foundation. That means finding its chrysobull, the imperial decree granting it legitimacy. Probably issued during the reign of Constantine II, whose handwriting is famously terrible. Historians still argue whether some of his monastic grants were real or merely elaborate doodles copied by junior scribes with overactive imaginations. You trudge to the document verification room. Yes, that's what it's really called. It's guarded by a woman named Syra, who wears spectacles thick enough to start fires. She peers at you from behind a stack of unsorted charters. Chrysobull, she says suspiciously. For St. Euphemia's Abbey, you answer, already bracing for a scoff. Instead, she nods slowly. Section D, Shelf 7. If it's not there, it never existed. Section D, Shelf 7. You descend into the archive depths, past marble busts of stern-faced emperors and oil lamps that flicker in a breeze that shouldn't exist. Dust swirls like tiny bureaucratic ghosts. You find the shelf creaking ominously under the weight of time. Scrolls are stacked in haphazard layers labeled in faded Greek, some wrapped in oilcloth, others bare and curling like ancient pastries. You spot a scroll tagged Euphemia Constantine VII and gently unroll it. The script is cramped with several marginalia, including a doodle of what might be a goat wearing a bishop's mitre. The decree appears legitimate land grant exemption from diocesan tithe permission to keep up to 6 noisy bells, a surprisingly generous allotment. You copy the relevant sections onto your tablet and reseal the scroll, marveling at how much bureaucracy is devoted to proving that yes, a handful of nuns and their goose were once important enough to warrant imperial ink. Back at your desk, Flavius accepts your notes with a grunt. You sure this is authentic? You nod. There's even an official doodle. He frowns. That's not a legal indicator. It was in red ink. He pauses. Fair point. The afternoon sun begins to angle through the high windows, casting golden shafts of light across the room. It would be beautiful if not for the fact that the dust motes dancing in those beams are likely made of powdered vellum and regret. You resume work transcribing a property transfer involving a widow, 3 disputed goats, and a very unclear boundary described only as between the large rock and the 3rd fig tree. Classic. Across the room, Theodotos suddenly mutters, "By the saints, look at this." He's hunched over a scroll from the fiscal archives, pointing at a marginal note. You peer at it. A small, scribbled addendum, property exempted due to imperial marriage. Who got married, you ask? Theodotos reads on. Some provincial administrator in Cilicia married into a minor imperial line, used it to exempt half his estate. You both whistle low. That's a power move, and possibly illegal. Historians still debate whether that marriage was legitimate. Theodotos adds, there's a whole theory that she was actually a wine merchant's daughter who bribed the priest. You chuckle. Honestly, I respect the hustle. The office hums softly with the sound of scribes at work, pens scratching scrolls, rustling one guy quietly humming a hymn about St. George punching a dragon. Outside, the occasional clatter of horse hooves echoes off the stone diplomatic envoys arriving perhaps, or just someone late for supper. As the hour drags on, your mind begins to wander. You imagine life as a monk tending goats, copying scriptures, never once hearing the word tax bracket. You fantasize about being a palace cook, inventing new stews, and pretending they were traditional. You even consider becoming a traveling peddler selling wax tablets and dubious relics, genuine hair of St. Mark, probably. But then you remember you do love this strange little job. You love the absurd details, the marginal doodles, the thrill of finding an obscure clause that lets a monastery keep its wine presses. It's not glamorous, it's not heroic, but it's your world. That thought is interrupted by Flavius clearing his throat. "Final hour," he says. "Cross-check the Thracian bishop lists. One of them may have died, or been replaced, or possibly moved. Ah yes, the triple mystery ecclesiastical turnover, clerical mortality and retirement disguised as pilgrimage. You fetch the register. A thick, unwieldy codex filled with bishop names, dates of ordination, and cryptic status indicators like absent in seclusion or see attached note suspicious duck. You find the entry in question Bishop Procopius of Didymotishon, last confirmed sighting 3 years ago attending a council where he objected to grain levies with alarming enthusiasm. After that, nothing but silence. You consult the margins. A small note barely legible. Believed to have withdrawn to Mount Athos. No formal resignation, so he's technically still bishop. Unless he's died, or reinvented himself as a hermit. You flag the entry for further investigation and move on. The light dims, the torches are lit. You finish your last transcription just as the evening bell tolls a deep, resonant clang that vibrates your very molars. You stretch your arms, ink-stained sleeves tugging tight across your shoulders. The room slowly empties, colleagues filing out with the weariness of philosophers after a failed debate. Flavius, uncharacteristically mellow in the glow of firelight, says, "Good work today." Then he adds, "Still watch your line spacing. It's drifting." You nod. A compliment, then a reprimand. The Flavius special. You gather your things. Your stylus, your notes, your half-eaten fig packet, which has now bonded permanently with the fabric of your sleeve. Theodotos meets you at the doorway. "Dinner," you smile. "Let's find somewhere with no scrolls, no ink, no bishops." He chuckles. "So, not anywhere in the palace." You and Theodotos wind your way out of the palace compound under a dusky purple sky, the day's work still clinging faintly to your robes and fingertips. Somewhere behind you, a scribe drops a stack of wax tablets, curses under his breath, and begins the long, sticky process of collecting them. But not your problem anymore, not until dawn. Outside the inner court, the world softens. The marble walkways give way to cobblestone, and the scent of musty parchment fades into something sharper, meatier roasted lamb and garlic from a tavern tucked along the palace's outer wall. You head there like homing pigeons. The tavern is called the Inkpot and Olive, run by a woman named Lydra, whose only visible emotion is mild disapproval. You suspect she was once a palace cook or perhaps a spy, possibly both. Now she makes stews, pours watered wine, and tells off drunk magistrates with the ease of a woman who knows too much. You and Theodotor settle at your usual spot near the back, beneath a faded fresco of what appears to be either the Virgin Mary or an unusually stern tax collector. Hard to tell. Dinner arrives lentils again, but with chopped leeks this time. Bread slightly less like roofing tile. A dollop of soft cheese, presumably from a sheep that's seen things. You eat slowly, elbows on the splintered table, listening to the lull of tavern sounds, low conversation, the occasional laugh, the clink of clay cups. Theodotos dips his bread. "So, did you see the Emperor today?" You snort. "What do you think?" He grins. "There was a rumor. Said he passed through the archives to inspect a new seal press. Did he? No idea. But someone definitely polished the floor for it." You sip your wine sour, but it gets the job done, and stare at the ceiling where a cobweb quivers gently in the breeze from the open shutters. You start to relax. For a moment, Byzantium isn't an empire of edicts and ecclesiastical contradictions. It's just a warm room, full bellies and voices drifting into the night. Then the monk appears. Robed in brown, smelling of ink and old leather, he steps through the door like a character from a hagiography. His eyes scan the room until they find you. Oh no. Are you the one who verified Saint Euphemia's charter? He asks, all solemnity and sandals. You glance at Theodotos. He's already trying to vanish behind his wine. Yes, you answer. He smiles. Thank you. I am Brother Myron. I serve at the Abbey. Ah, the Abbey of Chickens and Goose. Excellent. We were uncertain if the charter had been recorded. We feared we had been forgotten. You assure him that the documents are intact, legible, and that their goose is officially recognized by the Empire, if only marginally. He beams. May God bless your ink-stained hands. The sisters will pray for your health. You nod graciously. Just ask them not to pray for a promotion. Those tend to come with more scrolls. He laughs deeply. Ah, you scribes. You mock the divine and yet hold the threads of history. You blink. That's surprisingly poetic. He leaves a small pouch of candied figs on your table as thanks, then disappears into the night as suddenly as he came. You're left blinking, slightly mystified with figs that smell of cloves and mystery. Theodotos leans in. That was weirdly inspirational. Yeah, you say, I kind of want to go organize something now. He pauses, then lifts a fig. To unexpected monks, to bureaucratic immortality, you reply, clinking your fig against his. The rest of dinner passes in companionable chewing. A few more patrons drift in, some minor officials from the treasury, one very drunk envoy from Egypt, loudly claiming he once saw the emperor sneeze. Eventually the tavern quiets. You step out into the cool air, full and drowsy, the sky now black and velvet-streaked. A sliver of moon hangs above the dome of Hagia Sophia, which gleams faintly like a pearl floating in the city's throat. You walk slowly. Theodotos peels off toward his lodging near the cistern, leaving you alone to meander through the palace's outer walkways. The torches lining the colonnades flicker, casting long shadows that sway like silent dancers. As you pass the south wing, you hear music, a lyre soft and uncertain coming from an open window. Someone in the court practices late. Maybe a servant, maybe a noble child. The melody is simple, but it carries across the stones like a forgotten lullaby. You pause. There's something about night in Constantinople that feels older than the city itself. The way the wind brushes the marble, the soft lap of the Bosporus beyond the walls. The very silence has a texture to it woven from centuries of whispered prayers and spilled ink. You reach your sleeping quarters, modest, cluttered, scented faintly of parchment glue and last week's olives. You light a small oil lamp and slump onto your cot robes, crumpling beneath you like discarded declarations. A few belongings lie scattered nearby, a chipped ink jar, a figurine of Athena you bought from a street vendor, and your lucky stylus carved with tiny faces, one smiling, one scowling, depending on which end you use. You undress without ceremony and lie back staring at the cracked plaster above you. Another day of scribal toil, another victory for the Empire's endless record. Somewhere deep in the archives, your name is already attached to another scroll. Nothing fancy, no great lore, just a monastery and its stubborn goose. But it's there, and that in Byzantium is its own kind of immortality. Your lamp sputters out. You sleep. Morning returns, as it always does in the Empire, too early, too bright, and accompanied by the unmistakable sound of someone banging a stick against a bronze pan to signal the start of the palace workday. You roll over groan into your bedding and debate the political ramifications of just not showing up. Unfortunately, the imperial bureaucracy frowns on truancy, especially for mid-level functionaries like you. You dress slowly, robes slightly more rumpled than ceremonial, but far too formal for anything resembling comfort. Your belt knot's a little crooked, but that's fine. You're not an ambassador. You're a bureaucrat. Perpetual neatness is suspicious in your profession. Breakfast is a handful of almonds and a chunk of bread, too stale to tempt even palace mice. You chew it with the solemn resignation of someone who's read 3 different tax codes in the last week. Then out the door, down 2 echoing corridors, and into the archives chamber again. The scrolls haven't moved, they never move, which is both comforting and horrifying. Today's task is glamorous in the way only Byzantine paperwork can be reconciling fiscal reports from 2 provincial Strategoi military governors who've submitted wildly different numbers for the same district. One claims record grain harvests and a surplus of oxen. The other alleges total drought and mysterious goat disappearances. You sit at your desk, eye twitching slightly, and open both scrolls. First problem, both Strategoi used different calendars. One referenced the standard Anno Mundi format, the other possibly to be clever, possibly to be confusing, used a local lunar system that no one's followed since the 10th century. So now, before you even compare oxen, you need to realign time itself. This is where your training kicks in. You grab a conversion chart, a wax tablet, and your third best stylus reserved for frustrating days, and begin plotting. Meanwhile, Flavius paces behind you like an anxious lion. "These discrepancies are too large," he mutters. "Either someone's lying or someone's misinformed." He says the last word the way one might say plague rat. Historians still argue whether these kinds of mismatched reports were deliberate fraud or simply the inevitable result of an empire so sprawling it practically needed a postal deity. You keep reading. The second scroll, the one with the goat disappearances, is riddled with euphemisms. Unforeseen animal redistribution is your favorite. You underline it just in case you ever write a novella. Then you come across something suspiciously precise. 12 bushels of millet diverted toward ecclesiastical celebration. See attached hymn. Sure enough, there it is. A full hymn written in tight Greek, praising Saint Sergius for an allegedly miraculous rainfall that saved the crops. You hum a few lines, catchy in a weirdly haunting way. Flavius returns. "I want a reconciled report on my desk by sunset." You nod without looking up, assuming the goats don't vanish again. He doesn't laugh. He never laughs. Probably removed the gland. You spend hours building a composite document, adjusting for calendar shifts, rounding grain weights, converting outdated tax measurements, and cross-referencing old harvest records. You unroll a dusty ledger from 5 years ago and find an entry that helps 2-year drought, increased wolf activity, minor famine, bishop blamed later vindicated. Perfect. Now you can recontextualize the goat shortages. Theodotos joins you halfway through, sipping from a mug of something vaguely herbal. "Heard you're untangling the grain fiasco," he says. "Want help?" You gesture helplessly at the pile. "I'd marry your help if I could." He scans the documents. Classic northern exaggeration meets southern underreporting. My favorite regional feud. You nod. And the goat's Theodotos frowns. That part's new. He reads the hymn. "You think the millet was used legally?" You shrug. "Depends on whether St. Sergius actually made it rain." He leans back, thoughtful. Historians still debate whether local saints were real meteorological events or just well-timed coincidences. You smirk. Either way, millet's gone. Midday arrives. You barely notice. A palace boy delivers dried dates and a jug of watered wine. You both eat like men, solving crimes, pausing only to mutter things like, "Why 3 oxen per field?" or "This seal looks tampered with." Eventually, the story emerges. Both Strategoi told the truth, but only the flattering parts. The north had early rains and high grain yields. The south had wolf problems and clerical misuse of tax stores. By combining the reports, you reconstruct something close to reality, if not quite truth. You pen a summary in precise hand harvest mixed. Minor animal losses. Recommendation for stricter oversight, but no formal penalties. You include the hymn because you're nothing if not thorough and secretly curious if Flavius will read it aloud. Scroll sealed, ink dried. You deliver it. Flavius reads it while standing, which is always a sign he's in judgment mode. he grunts. This him... Yes, it scans well. You blink. Did he just admit to liking it? He tosses the scroll onto a stack. Accepted. Add it to the quarterly. Victory. Quiet, papery, non-glorious victory. You return to your desk and take a moment to breathe. Your fingers are ink-streaked. Your back aches. But the report is sound, and the Empire lurches one step closer to administrative harmony. Across the hall, a junior scribe struggles with a scroll longer than he is tall. Somewhere someone is dictating a sermon. A cat prowls the edge of the archives, tail high, ignoring everyone with imperial disdain. You allow yourself a moment of stillness. The kind of calm that only comes from solving something almost no one will ever know needed solving. Then, because Byzantium never sleeps, Flavius calls out again. There's a missing revenue tally from Dalmatia. You groan. Loudly, Theodotos chuckles. Welcome back to the coalface. And just like that, it begins again. You are deep into the missing Dalmatian revenue scroll by the time the shadows in the archive grow long and lazy. The golden sunlight has that syrupy slant, the kind that makes you want to stretch out on a roof and pretend you're an emperor who doesn't need to care about miscounted salt tariffs. But alas, salt tariffs care about you. Theodotos lingers near your desk, nibbling on a fig leftover from last night's monk. So Dalmatia, still paying in salt and fish skins, apparently, you mutter, squinting at the document. Except now they've added 2.5 barrels of fermented seabird paste to their annual contribution. Theodotos chokes. That sounds like a punishment, not a tax. You push your stylus behind your ear. You ever wonder if these governors just make stuff up to see if we'll notice historians still argue whether that fermented paste was a local delicacy or some kind of hazing ritual he deadpans? You chuckle but keep reading. The scroll is in rough shape, partially water-damaged seals, half flaked off, and the script slants like the scribe was writing from the deck of a ship in high winds. Still, you piece together the gist. A coastal province probably hit by piracy again has redirected its usual cash levies to alternative goods. Hence the paste. Also a footnote about 27 semi-serviceable fishing vessels, a phrase so vague it might as well be a political slogan. You note all this and prepare a response. Standard policy allows for non-monetary tribute in times of unrest, but not indefinitely. You'll draft a recommendation for a 2-year exception contingent on documentation of maritime raids. You also attach a query: please clarify the number of actual crew members per semi-serviceable boat, ideally before someone drowns. You glance at Theodotos. Want to go see what a semi-serviceable fishing boat looks like? He raises an eyebrow. Field trip, you smirk. Field investigation, in the name of bureaucratic integrity. He shrugs. I'm in. Thus begins your brief excursion, more of a stroll really toward the imperial port, which being near the palace is thankfully not too far. It's late afternoon and the city is alive with that particular Byzantine hum: sandal feet, slapping stone vendors shouting in multiple dialects, distant chanting from a chapel tucked between bathhouses. The port itself smells like brine rope and optimism left in the sun too long. Dockhands haul crates. Sailors argue in Greek Latin and something that might be Bulgar. You flash your wax tablets and drop the phrase imperial inquiry enough times that eventually someone lets you through. And there it is. A small fleet of fishing boats bobbing lazily in the water, tied together like a suspiciously tight-knit family. Most have patched sails. One has what appears to be a door nailed in place of a rudder. Another is actively being pecked at by seagulls. So that's what semi-serviceable means, you mutter. Theodotos taps the hull of one boat. This one's mostly barnacle. You find the harbour master, who is predictably annoyed. No, they're not warships, he says, but they float, mostly, and they bring in fish, sometimes. If you're lucky and not too picky, you explain your audit. He waves vaguely at a pile of netting and says, You want numbers? Here 12 have working sails, 7 are rowboats, 8 more are ceremonial. You pause. Ceremonial used in festivals, painted bright. Sometimes they go out on the water. Once one sank, you write it all down. The Empire must know about the ceremonial boats. This is the kind of granular detail that keeps Byzantium spinning after all. As you finish up, a boy runs down the dock yelling, "Fish! We have fish and trips over a rope." His basket goes flying. Silver-scaled chaos erupts. One fish slaps your sandal before escaping into the harbor. Theodotos snorts. We'll count that one as lost to piracy. You return to the archives with your findings, wet sandal and all. The sun is sinking now, dipping behind the rooftops of Constantinople like a coin slipping through a grating. Everything's tinged gold and amber, as if the city has briefly decided to forgive itself for being exhausting. You submit your report to Flavius, who reads it with his usual blend of suspicion and disdain. Ceremonial boats, he says. Yes, and the seabird paste, still unconfirmed. He grunts. Then, surprisingly, good work. You nearly fall over. He adds, draft a notice for provisional approval of their tribute structure. Mark it pending re-evaluation. Also flag it for the Imperial Maritime Office. You nod. He turns and disappears into his own sea of paperwork. After he's gone, Theodotos leans in. Did he just compliment us? Not sure. Might have been sarcasm. I'll take it either way. You retire to the courtyard near the scriptorium. A small fountain trickles in the center, and a lemon tree throws dappled shadows across the tiles. You sit on a bench, stretch your aching legs, and peel a date. A palace cat slinks by tail high. You offer it the date. It sniffs, looks disgusted, and wanders off. The day has been long, peculiar, and filled with more fish-based diplomacy than usual. But you've survived it. Byzantium is no less strange than yesterday, but at least it's documented. A group of junior scribes walk past, arguing about which emperor had the best beard. You overhear one passionately defend Constantine VII. Another insists on Basil II. Historians still argue whether facial hair had any bearing on imperial effectiveness, but that doesn't stop palace gossip. You lean back, close your eyes for a moment. A gentle breeze ruffles your robe. And somewhere far off in the city, a lone voice begins a hymn to St. Sergius, still echoing the faint scent of millet and mystery. Evening settles over Constantinople like a heavy velvet curtain, its embroidered gold lining catching the last traces of daylight. By now, most sane bureaucrats have returned to their quarters or ducked into a quiet tavern where no one expects them to translate legal code. But you have been summoned. Not by Flavius, thankfully. No, this time a different kind of shadowy hand has reached for you. Come quickly, a page had whispered, earlier eyes darting like a hunted pigeon's. The logothete of the Genicon wants to speak with you. Now here you are standing in a small lamplit chamber with too many silk cushions and too few places to hide. The logothete, chief financial officer of the Byzantine Empire, collector of taxes, master of ledgers, and according to rumor, eater of dreams, sits reclined like a panther digesting prey. You've been reviewing the Dalmatian revenue, he says, voice slick as freshly oiled parchment. You bow stiffly. Yes, Lord. And this fermented bird paste. Is it real? You blink. We believe so. He stares at you, long enough that you count 3 heartbeats and start questioning your life choices. Then abruptly he waves a hand. Fascinating. I want it on the approved goods list, but only for coastal provinces. I'm thinking prestige delicacy. You hesitate. Prestige, sir? Oh yes, anything rare and disgusting must be valuable. That's economics. Historians still argue whether the logothete's economic policies were based on theory, intuition, or pure chaos dressed in nice robes. You scratch a note onto your tablet. Bird paste, coastal, prestige. He nods. Also, I've received word that someone in the Secretariat of Public Order has been misfiling harbor dues. I want you to look into it. You blink again. Me, of course. You've got a nose for fraud. Or maybe it's just ink. Either way go. And just like that, you're back out in the corridor halfway through a date, still trying to comprehend what just happened. The Secretariat of Public Order is located in one of the less glamorous wings of the palace complex. Fewer mosaics, more mildew. You descend into a room that smells faintly of onions and treason, where two junior clerks bicker over a tax register like it's a love letter gone wrong. You clear your throat. Imperial audit. One clerk, a pale young man with ink-stained fingers, looks horrified. The other, an older woman with the aura of someone who once shouted at a bishop and survived, simply nods and gestures to the mess of scrolls on the table. You dig in. It takes about an hour before you find it a pattern of missing toll entries from the harbors near Chrysopolis. Small discrepancies, each just minor enough to avoid notice. But altogether, they add up to a rather suspicious shortfall. You frown. Someone's skimming. The older clerk squints. Could be a counting error. You raise an eyebrow. 15 times in 1 month. She shrugs. We get tired. Sure, but boats don't. You trace the irregularities back to a specific clerk's hand. His signature scrawl is, unfortunately for him, unique. You bag the scrolls and prepare to submit them to Flavius. No need to take this one to the logothete, he'll find out anyway. Probably before you finish filing it. Back at the archives, you drop the offending scrolls on Flavius's desk. He scans the first few lines and grunts approvingly. Good work. Take the rest of the evening. Unless you freeze. Unless you'd prefer to help me reconcile the dye tariffs from Nicaea. You shake your head so fast your neck protests. I'll take the evening, thank you. He doesn't smile. That would violate protocol. But you think his eye twitched in amusement. Maybe. So for the first time in days, you're free before midnight. You retreat to the upper cloister balcony, your favorite hidden spot above the palace gardens. The view is ridiculous domes glinting under the last blue wash of dusk sea, curling like ink just beyond the city walls, and the sound of Constantinople winding down bells' prayers, and the occasional curse from someone who stepped on a cat. You lean on the marble railing and let your shoulders drop for the first time all day. From here, the city looks calm, peaceful, almost like it runs itself. Which, of course, it doesn't. It runs on caffeine paranoia and middle-ranking bureaucrats like you grinding away one scroll at a time to keep the machinery of empire from collapsing in on itself. Theodotos finds you eventually balancing 2 goblets of lukewarm wine. I heard you caught a toll cheat. You nod. And invented a new luxury product. He offers a goblet. To seabird paste. You clink. May it never touch our lips. You sit together for a while, listening to the breeze play with the olive trees below. You can hear faint laughter from somewhere deep in the city. A tavern, a family, maybe just ghosts with good timing. Eventually, Theodotos sighs. You ever think about leaving? You glance at him. Leaving the palace, the city, the empire, all of it. You pause. The truth is, you have. Briefly. On particularly bad scroll days. When the ink won't dry and Flavius demands a 6-page correction on a tax you didn't invent. But then you remember moments like this, the hush of a balcony high above Byzantium wine in hand sea, glittering like spilled coins. The ridiculous joy of catching someone in a lie just by comparing handwriting. The quiet power of knowing the emperor's budget doesn't balance without you. I think about it, you say? Then I remember, where else can I get paid to write poetry about fish taxes? He laughs. True. The moon is rising now, slow and heavy and full. The whole city seems to pause just for a breath, and in that stillness you realize something. For all its madness, Byzantium is your home, not because of the palace or the prestige or the very mediocre wine, but because of the people like you holding it together with ink and nerve and the sheer stubborn refusal to let things fall apart. You finish your drink. Time to sleep. Tomorrow's goat tally isn't going to audit itself. Your eyes crack open before dawn, the sky outside still soaked in indigo. Somewhere nearby, a rooster makes a noise that sounds less like a crow and more like an existential complaint. You roll out of bed with the grace of a sack of scrolls, stretch until your spine cracks like old parchment, and begin another day in the elegant spiral of Byzantine bureaucracy. Today's treat, you're assigned to assist with something truly special, the census recount. Yes, again. It seems that the latest census report from the Bithynian province has, in the words of Flavius, numerical enthusiasm exceeding credibility, which is a poetic way of saying someone added a few thousand extra goats and conveniently forgot to mention a missing village. You trudge towards the review chamber, where the Imperial Census Commission convenes under a beautiful but badly leaking dome. Pigeons flap moodily overhead. A clerk is already sweeping droppings off the lecterns. "Morning," you murmur. He nods with the resigned look of someone who stopped trying to beat the pigeons and instead negotiates with them. At the center table, a hulking stack of census scrolls waits for your inspection. Each bears an elaborate seal, faintly crusted with wax dust, and the margins are festooned with tiny notes, scribbled by anxious provincial scribes trying to explain why their region suddenly has 24 one-eyed potters and a suspiciously large number of triplets. You read aloud, "Village of Skaptopara now reports 64 goats, up from last year's 3. Theodotos, sitting across from you, sips from a cup of something that might once have been tea. Incredible breeding season or mass goat hallucination. Historians still argue whether some provincial census inflation was deliberate fraud, local superstition, or simply a complete misunderstanding of how numbers work. You tally adjustments. Where a town reports 19 bakers for a population of 80, you make a note. Where a tax rate shifts mid-sentence, you investigate. You learn to spot the lies woven into parchment, too clean symmetry, conveniently round figures, whole categories of people, absent widows, monks, anyone who doesn't scream, taxable. And then there's the village that charmingly lists its livestock in poetry. 5 cows that graze, 2 bulls that bellow, 3 hens who sing as bright as yellow. You stare. This is a tax document, not a hymn. Theodotos shrugs. Maybe the scribe got bored. You sigh and write figures unclear requires on-site clarification. As the sun rises, so too does the heat in the census chamber. The scrolls multiply like rabbits. You peel back another layer and discover the grand gem of the morning, a town that claims 15.5 residents. You look up. Theodotos. How does someone count as half a resident? He doesn't look up. Might be a toddler or a centaur. Centaur population remains unconfirmed, you mutter and mark it for clarification. Around mid-morning, the Assistant Secretary of Statistical Regularities, yes, that's an actual title, comes by peering over the stacks like a heron looking for frogs. He's known for his obsession with columns, both architectural and numerical, and often mutters phrases like demographic rhythm while staring at ledgers. "Are the ratios aligning?" he asks, voice breathy with anticipation. You glance at a scroll. More or less, if you ignore the herd of imaginary oxen near Nicomedia. He frowns. Are they metaphorical oxen, named a very specific oxen? Each has a name. He leans in, whispers, "Interesting. That might be liturgical." You decide not to follow that thread. Later, you're handed a side task translating a census form submitted in vulgar Latin by a town that didn't get the memo that Greek is now preferred. You squint at the smudged, angry script and piece together that this village seems to measure grain in units called grandmother's sacks. No one is entirely sure how large a grandmother's sack is, and the record doesn't say whether this is the grandmother in question still living. Especially large, fond of exaggeration. You pencil in unit unclear potential folkloric error. Around noon, a porter arrives with food. Barley bread, a soft cheese that smells like decisive action, and olives stuffed with possibly anchovy, possibly regret. You eat quickly, rubbing your eyes. The margins are beginning to blur. The goats are winning. Then a breakthrough. One scroll, slightly water-damaged but legible, reveals that a scribe has openly confessed in a footnote. Forgive me, but our numbers are largely guesses. No one has seen the shepherd in weeks, and the mayor is blind in one eye and guesses with the other. You smile. Honesty at last. You forward the scroll to Flavius with a note request on-site audit and vision test. By late afternoon, the stack has shrunk to a more manageable chaos. You've flagged a dozen inconsistencies, clarified 3 measuring units, and personally condemned a poetic goat census to the flames of re-editing. Theodotos stretches. Think we saved the empire, you grin. We at least saved it from a goat uprising. Just then, a messenger arrives out of breath and wild-eyed clutching a wax-sealed tablet. You break the seal. It reads, "By order of the Logothete, you are requested to assist with an urgent demographic recalibration for the Imperial Games seating chart. Discrepancy discovered in citizen categories freeborn, freeman, and freeman but uncertain." You blink. What? Theodotos snorts. You're being summoned to fix the bleachers. Of course, you pack your stylus. The bleachers await. The games are held in the Hippodrome, a massive curved amphitheater that echoes with history hoofbeats and the occasional riot. The seating is stratified by class loyalty and which theological interpretation of the Trinity you favor. Assigning these seats is not just event planning, it's political choreography. You're greeted by the game's overseer, a man whose robe is tighter than his facial muscles. The seating chart is incomplete, he says. We've overcounted the greens and undercounted the blues, and someone assigned a bishop to the beer section. You stare at the chart. It's chaos, more arrows than a Hun raid. You sigh. Okay, where's the census data? The overseer waves a hand. We gave up. You're the expert. You close your eyes. You don't feel like an expert. You feel like a sponge full of goat figures and grandmother sacks. But still, the city must sit. So you pull out your wax tablet, draw a grid, and begin reshaping Byzantine society one seat at a time. So here you are, elbows deep in one of Byzantium's most sacred rituals, not prayer, not imperial proclamation, but the allocation of circus seating. You sit cross-legged on the floor of a shadowy storage chamber, tucked beneath the Hippodrome bleachers, where the city's sounds filter in like muffled thunder. Around you, scrolls are scattered like fallen leaves after a bureaucratic storm. Your candle sputters gently, threatening to give up as you mutter to yourself and scratch quick notes on a wax tablet. All right, you say to no one in particular, the blue faction's mid-tier bakers go here. The green silk vendors, upper row near the latrines. That's what they get for last year's tax protest. Yes, the circus seating chart isn't just about where people sit. It's about why. Social status, loyalty to the emperor, past tax compliance, family honor, theological stance, shoe cleanliness, each is a thread in this chaotic tapestry. And Byzantines take it very seriously. The last time a blue supporter sat 1 row too low, 3 lawsuits, a duel, and a minor street brawl followed. The overseer reappears, clutching a bundle of wax-sealed tokens. These are the current seat assignments. You glance at them. Some of these are duplicates, yes, and some are bribes. You sigh. Of course they are. He leans in, whispering like a conspirator. The Empress herself wants her cousin's husband moved closer to the imperial box. He's deaf and thinks the greens are a fruit. Subtle political messaging, you mutter. Got it. You shuffle his seat forward 3 rows up and 1 column over. A powerful spot, but just far enough that his mistaken fruit chanting won't echo too loudly into the royal box. Historians still argue whether the Hippodrome seating charts reflected a microcosm of social mobility or merely an elaborate distraction to keep citizens from focusing on tax hikes. Back to the scrolls. You unroll a list of fishmongers granted honorary Spice Guild proximity during the games, something about a favor they did for a senator's nephew who fell into the harbor. You draw a quick triangle beside their names. Triangles mean honored but smelly. They go far left under the awnings. By midday, the system begins to take shape. You've created a color-coded, symbol-enhanced matrix of social seating that would make a lesser scribe cry, possibly scream, maybe both. You introduce a new icon, a crescent, to indicate theologically volatile. There are at least 43 citizens who have recently changed doctrinal sides and must be seated at a safe distance from one another, like unstable chemical compounds. You plot them like landmines across the stands. Suddenly, a junior page arrives with the urgency of a flaming chariot. The Imperial Equerry says the chariot stables report a protest from the Blues. They claim a goat belonging to the Greens has been blessed with Imperial incense and is now unfairly fast. The goat, yes, sir. You rub your temples. What are they asking for? An exorcism. And seating upgrades. You add it to your list. Right, exorcism and premium seats. Just a normal Tuesday. In the midst of all this, you find a quiet moment to gaze up through a grate above. The afternoon light is dimming. It throws long shadows across the empty arena. For a moment, you imagine the roar of the crowd, the blur of hooves, the banners snapping in the wind. You imagine what it must be like to sit in the Emperor's box, detached from the chaos, but somehow above it, watching, judging, half godlike. Then your candle goes out. You groan, relight it, and return to reality. Chicken scratch ink political seating strategy, and a goat potentially faster than imperial regulations allow. You dispatch a runner to the Secretariat of Animal Affairs. Yes, there is one. Their sigil features a mule in laurels. Their reply is quick and unhelpful. We do not regulate chariot goats, suggest ritual purification and a modest grain bribe. Theodotos arrives not long after, carrying 2 small loaves of honeyed bread and an expression that says, "Someone made me read poetry to nobles again." You nod toward the pile of assignments. They want every priest, butcher, mosaic repairman, and part-time astrologer assigned a seat. He bites into the bread. Alphabetically or by crime, depends on which side they shouted for last year. He chews thoughtfully. We should charge admission for this nonsense. We do, you reply, but we call it taxes. There's a brief silence as the two of you work side by side, mapping Byzantium's tangled soul onto a horseshoe of stone benches. You begin to feel strangely like a god of your own microcosm, doling out status in wax and ink, manipulating the chessboard of everyday people. Here sits a baker next to a general's illegitimate son. There, a widow who once bribed a census clerk to be listed as 22 instead of 54. And above them all, the emperor himself, aloof, adored, and increasingly deaf. By evening, the chart is done. You've designed the most balanced, politically inoffensive, spiritually considerate circus seating plan in months. It probably won't spark riots. Probably. You hand it to the overseer. He takes it like it's made of gold. This is harmonious. You nod, rubbing your eyes. Let's hope the audience agrees. But the moment you allow yourself to imagine a peaceful end to the day, a messenger bursts in, sweating through his robe. Emergency, he gasps. A clerical mix-up. The Persian envoy has been assigned seats behind the Zetian ambassador. You blink. The one he publicly insulted at the banquet, yes. And the Zetian has bodyguards. Big ones. You hold up the plan. There's no more front row space, he swallows. Then you'll need to make room. You spend the next hour undoing half your work, shifting ambassadors around like fragile porcelain dolls in a thunderstorm. Eventually, with several additions to your most dangerous seating combinations list, you manage to move the Persian delegate 1 seat forward, the Scythian 1 seat diagonally back, and insert an honorary bishop between them as a kind of holy buffer. Finally, you return to the palace by torchlight. Your robe smells of sweating and somehow goat incense. In your quarters, you collapse onto your bed without ceremony. The ceiling swirls slightly from exhaustion. You let your fingers dangle off the side of the cot and smile faintly. Another day survived. Another page written in the Empire's great, ridiculous story. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow the postmaster's report on disappearing pigeons is due. You just can't wait. You wake to the sharp, rhythmic tap-tap of a staff on stone outside your door. No knock, no greeting, just that firm, bureaucratic percussion that says, "Get up, there's paperwork to be done, and no one else wants to do it." You drag yourself out of bed, your joints creaking like an old temple door, and crack open the wooden shutter. Outside, a pale sun is rising like a yolk over a pan of fog. Birds chirp with unearned enthusiasm. The summons is from the Ministry of Post and Provisions. Today you're investigating the Empire's latest logistical mystery, a spike in the disappearance of official carrier pigeons along the Anatolian route. Yes, carrier pigeons. The tiny feathered lifeline between outposts, scribes, and siege warnings. It turns out not only are the pigeons not arriving, but the last message received was simply, "Darkness comes." You trudge through the city past sleepy vendors and monks, washing their robes in icy fountains until you reach the ministry. It's housed in a narrow brick building between a candle maker and a man who carves unsettling wooden dolls. Classic neighborhood. Inside, a tall clerk greets you with the urgent enthusiasm of someone who's been shouting into the void for days. "They're vanishing, sir. Mid-air. One made it halfway to Antura and then nothing. We suspect sabotage." You blink. Sabotage of pigeons. He nods solemnly. Or falcons. You're handed a long soot-stained ledger tracking every pigeon dispatched over the past moon cycle. Their names, yes, they all have names, routes, and estimated times of arrival. Some entries have question marks instead of times. One simply says, "devoured." You ask for a more concrete incident log. A junior scribe brings you a scroll detailing strange aerial activity. Unusual silhouettes, sounds of flapping, and in one case a pigeon returned with a small note tied to its leg that read, "Try again." You frown. So someone's intercepting them or mocking us. You lean back in your chair. Are there any settlements along the route known for culinary interest in pigeons 3? One even has a festival. You sigh. Of course they do. Historians still argue whether Byzantine pigeon routes were ever truly secure, or if they operated mainly through divine luck and pigeon loyalty. You spend the rest of the morning in the records room, buried in pigeon logbooks that smell of feathers, damp papyrus, and defeat. Each disappearance is catalogued with increasing poetic despair. One entry simply reads, "Flew east, never looked back." You begin assembling a list of suspects: rogue falconers, amateur message thieves, someone who just really hates birds. Around noon, you receive a whispered tip from a janitor named Irenaeus, who says, "My cousin in Nicomedia saw a merchant with a cage full of pigeons, all tagged. That's all the evidence you need to arrange a quiet visit." You and a small guard detail head down to the docks where shady merchant types do the Byzantine equivalent of loitering, pretending to adjust their cargo while absolutely watching everyone else. You find the merchant easily. His robe is embroidered with plumage, and he's got the panicked look of someone caught mid-scam. "Lovely morning for bird business," you say, inspecting the large cage behind him. Inside, a dozen pigeons coo anxiously. A few have wax stamps on their legs, the imperial seal. You raise an eyebrow. "Care to explain?" He laughs nervously. "Oh, they wandered into my warehouse. All 12. Birds are very social creatures." You wave a hand and let the guards take over. The merchant is not so gently escorted away for a friendly imperial conversation, and the pigeons are retrieved. You note that some of their messages were not returned, which means, of course, the worst thing a bureaucrat can imagine: lost documentation. By late afternoon, you're in the Aviary Division headquarters, a circular tower filled with coops, perches, and scribes who specialize in avian dispatch. You sit with the chief falconer, who, despite the title, mostly works with pigeons and smells like he sleeps in straw. He hands you a small odd item, a miniature pigeon helmet. "We tried armor," he says proudly. "Didn't work. Too heavy. They refused to fly." You nod slowly. "Have you considered camouflage? We painted one to look like a hawk. It had an identity crisis. You note the attempt but decide the next best step is to improve security by varying flight paths and using decoy birds. Also maybe sending one scribe on foot just in case. You spend the evening drafting new protocols for pigeon dispatch, including the following randomized departure times. 1 in 10 pigeons to carry false messages as bait. Pigeon Watch Patrol. Yes, it's real now. You write all of this on a fresh scroll, seal it with wax, and attach it to a pigeon named Hypatios. You watch as he launches from the coop circles once and disappears into the golden dusk. You hope he makes it. You return to your quarters late, your robe dusted with straw and your mind filled with bird conspiracies. As you pull off your sandals, you find a tiny feather stuck to your tunic. You flick it toward the floor where it drifts like an unbothered bureaucrat, light and aimless. You flop onto your cot and murmur, "I tracked down a black market pigeon ring today." Your room, blessedly silent, does not reply. Outside, the city hums low with night. A distant bell tolls the hour. Somewhere a message arrives on time. Sleep is a luxury you flirt with but never truly possess. And tonight, like most, it leaves you for someone less obsessed with parchment and birds. At dawn, a soft knock jars you awake, less panicked than usual, but firm enough to signal importance. You're already halfway dressed. A scribe's body develops this sixth sense, the ability to get clothed while still dreaming of ink stains. The door opens to reveal Theodotos, holding a cup of something warm and murky. No major emergencies, he says. Just a routine audit. You blink. There's no such thing. Exactly, he replies, handing you the drink. You trudge through the palace corridors, past walls echoing with early morning chants, and the occasional snore from a passing guard. Today's assignment reviewing a decade's worth of records from the Office of Imperial Revenue Estimation. It's exactly as glamorous as it sounds. The chamber they've given you for the task is an archive dungeon, damp, cold, and filled with stacks of records that lean like drunken senators at a symposium. You sit down and open the first ledger. It begins year of the 8th indiction tax yield of wheat slightly down, cause unknown, possibly frogs. You sigh. It's going to be one of those days. The audit begins with basic math. You flip through entries recalculating the yield of barley versus the temple's cut, factoring in random disasters, a hailstorm, a traveling prophet who convinced an entire village to burn their grain, and a misprint that lists a goat as a taxpayer. Mainstream fact, in Byzantium, taxes weren't always paid in coin. Often it was goods, livestock, spices, bricks, or even fabric. You once processed payment in the form of 22 hand-embroidered towels, all depicting St. George in slightly different emotional states. You pause at a page dated to the reign of Constantine VII. It's been updated in 5 different inks, one of them labeled revised during the blight of dancing goats. A marginal note reads, "The goats were later pardoned." You wonder briefly how many bureaucrats had to debate the ethics of goat culpability. A junior clerk enters with an update. The city of Dorylaeon claims a sudden drop in tax compliance is due to a local oracle predicting the end of coinage. You rub your temples. So people are hoarding? No, sir. They've started trading in dried apricots. You make a note, economic divergence. Investigate fruit-based currencies. Historians still argue whether such localized tax resistance was economic protest, religious fervor, or just an elaborate excuse to avoid paying anything ever. By midday, you've catalogued over 70 discrepancies. You discover an entire village that's been paying taxes twice because 2 different agents claimed jurisdiction. One of them may not exist. His name is just Gregory the Shadow. Theodotos leans over. What if Gregory is a collective fiction, a myth created by overworked agents to justify missing income? You pause. Or he's real, and very rich. Either way, you flag the entry and assign it to a newly created category, possible mythical bureaucrats. Lunch is bread with preserved figs eaten while cross-referencing mule tithes. You find a strange trend: multiple regions list their mules as exceptionally modest in temperament, which somehow qualifies them for a reduced rate. You snort softly. "We tax behavior now," Theodotos, chewing noisily beside you, shrugs. "Wouldn't you if you could? You lose track of time among the ledgers." Hours slide by as the room darkens. Occasionally you light a fresh candle or stand to stretch, staring out a narrow window at the city's glow. The domes glisten, lanterns sway gently on boats drifting the Bosporus. Life, impossibly large and chaotic, continues beyond these walls. But here in the paper and dust cocoon of audit, it's just numbers. Numbers and the ghost of Gregory the Shadow. A final scroll catches your eye. It's different, finer script sealed with a faded stamp. You crack it open. It's a list of imperial expenses, mosaic repairs, diplomatic gifts, including 2 singing parrots and a small elephant, and palace renovations listed as aesthetic sanctification. You chuckle. But one entry stands out: monthly compensation to scribes reduced by quarter for fiscal harmony. You stare at it. Your name is listed. Right there. 4 lines down, scribbled next to an even smaller note due to excessive ink usage. You mutter, "So that's what fiscal harmony sounds like." Still, you don't complain. You're too tired, and there's something comforting about it, like being part of a machine that always squeaks but never fully breaks. You gather the scrolls, seal your report with care, and return it to the record keeper. You'll find 18 unresolved mysteries, you say. 7 clerical errors, 5 ghost taxes, and 1 probable goat rebellion. He bows. Standard, then. Back in your quarters, you stare at your bed. It doesn't beckon. It demands. Your shoulders ache. Your fingers are still smudged with ink and apricot residue. As you slide beneath the coarse linen blanket, a final thought floats in. You've survived another day in Byzantium. You negotiated goat diplomacy, exposed avian theft, and kept the empire running 1 cracked ledger at a time. Your eyelids drift lower and lower. And now? Wind down 300 words, the city grows quieter with every breath you take. Outside Constantinople exhales a soft sigh of midnight waves, lapping against stone, distant bells, marking the hour like gentle whispers. The wind slips through the shutters, cool and slow, stirring the curtains like ghostly fingertips. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then falls silent again. You feel the weight of the day dissolving like sand pulled out with the tide. The ink stains on your hands fade into memory. The numbers, the pigeons, the ledgers, they all blur together, gently receding into the soft, humming dark. Every sound is distant now. Every thought floats a little higher. You did enough. You were enough. The empire will still be standing when you wake, wobbling perhaps, but standing. The scrolls will be waiting. The scribes will gossip. The emperor will declare something peculiar before breakfast. But none of that matters right now. Right now, there's just you and sleep, and the rhythm of your breathing syncing with the stillness of the world outside. Let your muscles go slack. Let the flickering torchlight behind your eyelids fade. Drift back through the corridors of ink and shadow, down into stillness. You are safe. You are calm. You are very, very far away. Good night, dear scribe. Good night, Byzantium.